All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Tonight, I am live with Mike DeVito. Mike is a 9-year NFL veteran and also a Christian. So tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about his football career, but mostly just about faith and football, in putting the two together, his career in the NFL and how his faith just happened and how it worked in the NFL. So thank you for joining us today, Mike.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much for having me on. I love what you have been doing on Twitter and all the content you're putting out. You're really a force for the kingdom. So it's an honor to be on here.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. So first, to start off, I want to talk a lot about faith, but as a football fan, I'm kind of curious about your football career. So maybe you could just give a brief kind of like overview of your career in football.
Yeah. Growing up, I had the best of both worlds. I had a dad who was a professional bodybuilder, and I had a grandfather who was a 30-year high school head football coach in Suffern, New York. And so growing up, it had always been my dream to play in the NFL. And that was kind of cultivated by my two mentors, my grandfather and my dad. And so they really left me no choice. I didn't grow up kind of the philosophy of today, which is, have kids play a bunch of different sports and find out what they like. My dad and grandfather said, look, you're going to lift weights and play football, and that's it. That's your choice, and you have no choice. So I was determined to play football. And so I grew up with those two influences, playing football in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Went to high school there, and then had the opportunity to play at the University of Maine in 2002. Got a scholarship to play in college, and so that was really, really exciting to get a chance to play Division I football. And I know that was big for my family, and we really enjoyed that. And then again in 2007, I finished up my college career and had an opportunity to sign a free agent deal in the NFL. So I signed with the New York Jets in 2007, which was really cool because I grew up a Jets fan. I'm from New York originally. My family's from New York. And so I grew up a Jets fan rooting for the Jets. And so it was really cool in 2007 to sign with them and get to go into a locker room and see a bunch of the heroes and mentors I grew up watching on TV. And so I played 6 years with the Jets, and then I finished out my career in Kansas City with the Chiefs from 2013 to 2015, and I retired in 2016. And my wife and I moved back up to Central Maine, where we're living now. And since then, it's been all school, and raising my two boys, Rocco and Sal. So that's kind of been the long and short of it.
Oh, whoops, my microphone was muted there. My bad. Sorry. Okay, so maybe that's really awesome stuff. So maybe you could give an example of maybe a really hard thing to do in your football career. There's a lot of tough drills and practices or a tough game or something like that. Maybe just an example of something just really hard that you remember to this day.
Yeah, there's always a ton of tough conditioning, tough, getting into shape, all the things that you have to put into to be a good football player. It's funny. Football is really a weird sport because when you think about it, especially in the NFL, you work 365 days a year. When I was playing the NFL, there wasn't a day that I wasn't lifting, running, studying, doing something to get ready to play the game on Sundays. But when you break it down, you play 16 games in an NFL season. So if you're healthy for the whole season, an NFL player plays 16 games in a regular season. And the average player plays about 20 to 30 reps a game. And each rep lasts about 3 to 5 seconds. So when you look at it at the end, you're working 365 days a year for basically 11 to 15 minutes of actual football that you play on Sundays. And so the stress is so much during the offseason because you realize there's not a lot of opportunity to make mistakes. And I guess I say that to say some of the toughest times in my career and some of the things I remember most, unfortunately, were the mistakes I made on Sunday because you don't really have a lot of opportunities. Again, it is a short amount of time. I had the blessing to be able to play for 9 years. And so I look back and think, man, I could have done things better. I could have worked harder. I have regrets. So I guess the toughest thing I would be, just to put it in one, a couple phrases would be just regret that I didn't I didn't maximize the time as well as I wish I had. And I'm sure there's a lot of players that kind of finish up with that same sentiment. You always look back and think, man, I had 9 years. What could I have been if I really worked that much harder? So when I look back at my career, that's kind of one thing that's difficult, is just leaving some missed opportunities out there on the field.
Yeah, it would be tough, but I mean, you can always do better. So maybe to the opposite end of the spectrum, what is one of your favorite memories from your football career?
Yeah, so probably my favorite memory, any Cowboys fans that you have watching probably won't like this, but I was playing for the Jets, and it was September 11th, 2011, so 10-year anniversary of September 11th. And we were playing in New York against the Cowboys. And we were beating the Cowboys, and I believe they were coming back. And it was right at the end of the game. And they were on like the 4 or 5 yard line. Their offense is going in, getting ready to score on their own 4 or 5 yards. So they're getting ready to score. And I was able to break through the line. And as Tony Romo was running in to score the game-winning touchdown, I put my helmet right where the ball was and knocked the ball loose, sacked Tony Romo, caused a fumble, recovered, and ended up winning the game because of it. And so, causing that fumble on September 11th, the 10-year anniversary at home in New York with our hometown fans, that was really, really a special experience and something I really treasure.
Yeah, man, that'd be amazing. That's my dream, to hit Tony Romo.
That's right.
So let's transition a little bit towards your walk as a Christian. So my first question for you is, when did you become a Christian?
Yeah, so it was, obviously with God's timing, it's always perfect timing. So I became a Christian in April of 2007, right before I left college to go play in the NFL. And so I grew up in not very, not at all a religious household. I grew up in a pretty secular household. And so religion really wasn't a part of it. We were taught to be good people, and it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was an atheist household. It wasn't like they were telling me God doesn't exist or anything like that, but just something that nobody really talked about. And so outside of my grandmother, there really wasn't, there wasn't any going to church or anything like that. She would take us to church on Easter and things like that. But, I wasn't a believer until 2007. I was at college, and my best friend, who ended up playing with me in the NFL, he said, "Hey man, you gotta come to church with me. I know we're about to leave school." He knew I was graduating. And so he said, I want you to come and check this out, check out church with me. And so I never really thought twice about it until that point. And again, this is in northern Maine, right? So he goes to an old school Pentecostal church up in northern Maine. And, before we went, he gave me the disclaimer. He said, listen, things can get a little wild in my church. There are people speaking in tongues and running around the aisles and falling out. And I remember thinking, geez, I want to go just to see this. This is crazy. I got to check this out. Like, again, not, just doing it to kind of, to please my buddy, but I wasn't really like into it. But then when he said that, I was like, I got to see this. This is crazy. And so I go to church with my buddy's church again up north in northern Maine, and this old school Pentecostal church in a double wide trailer. And just like my buddy said, it was totally chaos. It was like, wow, I can't believe this is church. I always envisioned church kind of the Catholic, Episcopalian, kneel, stand, and these people are running around and speaking in tongues. And so, they're doing all that. And finally, I'm like, all right, I got to get out of here. This is just too crazy. And so at the end of the service, they do an altar call, and basically they condense all the madness that was around the church right up into the front. And if you don't know Jesus, you better believe you're gonna meet him. You're gonna be up there getting prayed for. And so everybody went up front. I stayed back in my pew, and I'm like, I'm not going anywhere up there. I don't want anything to do with it. And finally, the pastors and elders, everybody's trying to get me to come up. I don't come up, and finally, I'm like, all right, I'll go up. I go up to the front of the room, and again, all this madness, all the speaking in tongues, all that, just confined to the front now. And I remember putting my head down and saying, God, if you're real, I just pray, just get me out of here as fast as possible. Like, whatever needs to happen for this to end, like, just please help me. But then I remember the pastor coming over and laying his hand on me, and the assistant pastor coming over and laying his hand on me. And they started to pray for me. And the best way I can describe it is just like electricity through my body. And within an instant, it was like the light switch was turned on. And I didn't need any propositional knowledge. I didn't need to know any certain verse of scripture to know, okay, whatever's going on, this is the truth. And it really was. I mean, it was that 180 turn within an instant. It wasn't a gradual process for me. It was like, nope, this is real. And so a week later, I got baptized in the church, and that was, perfect timing, because right after that, I was out of Maine and heading to the NFL. And I'm sure we'll talk about kind of the influences in the NFL as well. But yeah, so that was kind of the quick version of my testimony.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome stuff. So talking about the NFL, so you were a new Christian. How did you really grow in your faith as you got thrown into the NFL? Because I'm sure that took up a lot of time, a big commitment to be in the league.
Yeah, no, it really did. And if it wasn't for the great Christian leaders that were on the team when I came in the NFL, I don't know where my faith would have been, if it would have lasted, because it really is a different world, right? You're leaving college, you're entering into the real world, and the NFL. There's obviously support systems, but it also can be very cold, especially coming in as a rookie. You're going in. I played defensive line, and I'm going into that defensive line room, and I'm trying to take the older guys' jobs. And this isn't like a college where I'm trying to just win the starting spot. I'm trying to take food off their table to put food on my table. And so sometimes it's hard to make friends when that's the situation. But there were some really, really good Christians on the team. Kenyon Coleman, James Dirth, Jericho Cotchery. There were some really strong Christians. It was 2007 with the Jets that took me under their wing and took me to Bible studies with them. We prayed together during training camp and just did life together as I was, learning the ropes as an NFL player. And so it kind of paralleled, learning the ropes as a Christian. And so it was incredible. And I really grew a lot as a football player, but more importantly, as a Christian, because of those influences I had. And so some of those guys were in the defensive line room with me, where they knew that I was there trying to win that spot and trying to take food off of their table. And yet that didn't matter to them. They were going to help me on the field. And more importantly, they're going to help me become a better Christian and learn about Jesus and walk the walk. And so, yeah, that's a testimony of those guys. And that's something that I carried further. I carried further in my career as I got older, was to try to be that mentor to younger players coming in who I knew, especially when I was getting older, I knew they were probably going to take my spot. But I took the same approach. It was like first a kingdom mindset where I want to mentor these guys in Christ and make sure that they're taken care of and spiritually taken care of. And that was something that was really important to me. And then try to mentor them on the field as well. And so that impact that those older guys had on me when I first came in the league really had an exponential effect.
Yeah, that's really awesome. So what was the religious culture in the locker room? I mean, did you have, I don't really know, were there a lot of people who just weren't religious, people who would openly be like an atheist or Muslims, anything like that? Like, what was the diversity look like in the locker room?
Yeah, you had a good amount of Christians. I mean, majority of Christians. Now, that didn't mean that everybody was going to go to Bible studies. So if you got 53 guys on a team, on an active roster, and we would, circle up to pray before every game, you had 95% of the team circling up to pray before the game. But the night before, you'd have a chapel service. And in chapel, you'd probably have 15 guys, 10 to 15 guys, sometimes more, sometimes less. So that's about a tenth of the team. Less than that. What is that? That's about a fifth of the team. Yeah. Good thing I did philosophy and not math. But yeah, so when you're talking about how sold out people were, it was hard to tell. But you certainly had a number of Christians. When I finished out my time in the NFL, I was on a team with a couple of Muslims who I became really close with, and then atheists, not openly. I don't remember meeting too many people who said, "Yeah, no, I'm an atheist." But football really is. I don't know. There's something interesting about football where it really goes hand in hand with faith. It's like faith, family, football. It's you always see those three put together. So I don't know if it's something about the game. The game's a violent sport, maybe violent things like that. You tend to recognize the need to fall back on something greater than yourself. So there was a lot of there was a very spiritual atmosphere. There was certainly a Christian atmosphere in the locker room on most of the teams I was on. And then when you really got down to it, there were some really amazing, sold out for Christ believers on those teams that were incredible leaders that are doing amazing things now. So yeah, so I would say it's really good. It was much harder. It would have been much harder to be a Christian in college, where in college there's a little bit more peer pressure. There's a little bit more pressure to conform to the group norms. In the NFL, everybody's married, got kids, doing their own thing, they're their own person. And so there's less pressure to kind of do some of the things that might derail a Christian walk. Now that's not to say it's that there aren't challenges, and it's not important to have that network of Christians there to support each other. But yeah, when I think back and compare and contrast that, college probably would have been a lot harder to be a Christian than the NFL.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So who were the leaders in terms of the Christian groups in the locker room? Was it like your chaplains, your coaches? Was it the players? I'm just,
Yeah. So each team has a team chaplain. When I was with the Jets, our chaplain was Adam Burt. He played 14 years in the NHL and then retired in 2001 to start a church in Manhattan. And then he became our chaplain, I think a little bit later, about 5 or 6 years later. And so he's been a mentor to me. We still do life together. I mean, we still talk all the time. And so he's been a great mentor in my life. Philip Kelly was our chaplain out in Kansas City. He had started a church out there and then became the chaplain for the Chiefs. And again, a great person, somebody that I really respected and looked up to. And then within the team itself, so you had these guys on the outside that would come in and be the chaplain for the team. So they would do chapel the Saturday night before the game. During the week, we would have a Bible study. So they kind of ran that stuff. And then, each year you'd have really Christian leaders that were on the team, guys you would look up to. Again, going way back to 2007, Kenyon Coleman was really I'm sure some guys will remember him. He's a fantastic leader, great football player, and he was probably the most real Christian. I mean, we're talking living the life. This man would get up. We would have training camp. Training camp is so hard. And training camp started at 6 o'clock in the morning. He'd get up at 5 and pray from 5 to 6 every morning. That's the kind of, he would just sold it. And so he would set that example for the rest of the guys. So a guy that I really looked up to and respected. I had the opportunity to play with Tim Tebow in 2012. And so he was our spiritual leader then. He was, again, another guy who just sold out for the cause, loved the kingdom. Just an amazing guy, somebody I looked up to. Dustin Colquitt out in Kansas City, another great Christian leader. So yeah, I mean, I can go through a whole list of guys. But no, it was broken down like that. You had the team chaplains, and then you had 2 or 3 guys who were kind of your Christian leaders in the locker room.
Man, I had no idea you played with Tebow. That'd be pretty cool. That's awesome. So yeah. I'm just curious there. What was it like? So what was it like being with Tebow? What was he like in terms of being a leader in the faith, leader on the football team, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. He was one of the few guys that I was starstruck when I saw him. I was really like, wow, that's Tim Tebow. So yeah, So Tim, again, is somebody that really lives it. He really lives it. So I'll give you a story that I always think of. We were flying home from a game, and Tim and I would sit next to each other. And I'm afraid to fly. I can't stand it. So anytime there's turbulence or anything like that, I'm holding on for dear life. And so the plane, we were in the plane. The plane was so turbulent. I'm saying all over the place. And it was, you know how it'll hit some turbulence and drop really fast? The plane kept doing that. And Tim saw that I was freaking out. And he said, "Hey, bro, this thing goes down. We just go right to home to heaven with our Heavenly Father." He's like, "You better hope this thing goes down." And I remember thinking, I wish I could believe that right now. Like I was so nervous. Like I believe that, but I'm still afraid to die right now, you know. But that's just how he lived. Like nothing fazed him. You know, being a quarterback in New York is difficult, especially when you have a name like Tim Tebow. I mean, it's a tough place to be a quarterback. You're going to face a lot of criticism, especially if we weren't doing well, so you get even more criticism. And he just took everything in stride. And he always fell back on his faith and how that was the ultimate important thing, and everything else was secondary. And so that was really amazing. Another thing he did was he challenged me. I remember one conversation we had. He just came out of nowhere and said, "Hey, DeVito, I'm going to beat you at everything I do." He said, "I'm gonna give more money to the church than you. I'm going to evangelize better than you. I'm going to live the life better than you." And he said, "When we get to heaven, I'm going to be in charge of more cities than you are. I'm going to have more crowns than you are." And I remember thinking, like, can he say that? I go to the Bible. Like, there's got to be some rule. But it motivated me. And it's like I've tried to take that forward, where it's like I still try. I don't think I'm saved by those things, and he didn't either. But just that competition amongst brothers to be better, that was really cool. So yeah, so I learned a lot from Tim.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. It's really cool. So obviously the locker room is a place where guys can be guys in a way, you know. I mean, obviously I played football in high school, so it's a lot different. But in your experience, how did you deal with, if there were any, you know, tough situations with the quote locker room talk, you know, as a Christian?
Yeah. You know, again, high school and college, to be honest with you, I think would be more difficult in that respect. Again, there's so much more pressure to conform, you know, and be involved in that. The locker room talk in the NFL, it just, I don't know, by the time, and again, that's when I had just become a Christian, going into the NFL. It wasn't super challenging. In fact, a lot of guys respected the guys who didn't do that kind of, you know, when you were set apart, when you weren't the guy that was cussing and swearing all the time, and you were the guy who was living it out, you know, and you weren't the guy that was going to go out, you know, to the different, not that you weren't going to have fun, but, you know, when the line was crossed, you weren't going to cross that line, right? There was a line in the sand that you were not going to cross. And that opened up a lot of conversations to evangelize and to talk to others about Jesus. Because guys at that point in life, they're thinking more about, you know, your worldview and what this life is all about. And high school and college can be much more about in the moment, you know. And so, sorry, my kids are screaming in the background. I apologize.
It's all good.
But yeah, so I didn't have to, you know, there was never any pressure to conform to that. And I really took pride in the fact that if I lived it out, people would seek me out to know more about Jesus. And there was nothing more rewarding than that, for somebody to come up and say, "Hey, I see you do life different. Like, what's that all about?" You know, and just that organically opened that door to the gospel. So yeah.
Yeah. Do you think there are a lot of people that came to the faith and came to know Christ during your experience, like in your career?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've seen I don't know personally how much effect I had, but I've seen a lot of guys come to Christ in NFL locker rooms. No doubt, no question. Again, the thing that makes the NFL so difficult is you could be there one day and gone the next day, right? And so if you're a guy, you have kids, you have a family, wife and kids, and you're trying to provide for them, and you have a bad day, that can really stress guys out, and guys get taxed because they're so worried about making the team, staying on the team, prospering on the field, because they know it could be one bad play and you're out the door. And so there's a lot of pressure there. And so when you live a life kind of that shalom, that peace, the other players will see that, because the NFL season is going to, no matter how well you're doing, it's going to be up and down. And so the other guys kind of see the guys that have found joy amongst the ups and the downs. And I feel like that really cultivates those conversations. And so I have, a long story short, I have seen a lot of guys come to Christ in NFL locker rooms. I can't think of directly through me, but just, through the whole process, whether it be Bible studies, chapels, other guys ministering. It really is a fruitful mission field. And the thing that's really cool about it is those guys have, those are people that have a lot of influence on society. I mean, you see some of these guys, they have, 100,000, 200,000, a million Twitter followers. And so you get them typing out Bible verses, that's going to millions and millions of people, or things like that, whatever it is. And so just that alone, it has such an exponential effect. So when you see souls coming to Christ in an NFL locker room of professional athletes, it really is just one of those moments where, like, thank you, Jesus, thank you, because it's going to have a big impact. Yeah,
that's really awesome. So as you're in your career, let's just say like a normal week in the NFL, what options did you have to like practice your faith, or like when, like Bible studies, chapel services, like things like that throughout a normal week?
Yeah, that's probably the most difficult part of it, is obviously playing on Sundays. So you're not going to church on Sundays. And so Saturday night we have chapel where we meet as a team in the hotel, the team hotel, whether we were at home or on the road. And they would have a room, set apart just for chapel. And so the chaplain would come in and he would preach a sermon, 15, 20-minute sermon. But you miss the fellowship and the things like that you would get at church. So you really have to seek that stuff out during the week. So if there's Bible studies during the week, we did couples Bible study every year where we would meet in different players' houses, and they would, have food catered in, and we would have the chaplain come and teach a couples study. Those kind of things are vital, because you're not getting the normal Christian kind of flow of life where you're at Wednesday night Bible studies, Sunday church, fellowship meetings, all those things that come along with just regular practicing Christian life. There's just not, it's not conducive to that. And so you have to be intentional with your walk, and everybody has to be intentional, but you have to say, okay, as much as I want to go to bed right now, I'm going to go to the 8 o'clock, couple study, because I know it's important for us as a couple, my wife and I know it's important just as a Christian to be in that fellowship that we're missing because we're in the middle of the season. And it also put a precedence on the off season, really getting connected and getting back in to the church back home or wherever you were at, because you knew soon enough you'd be right back to playing football and you'd have to be gone again.
Yeah, that's great stuff. So I want to transition here. We're talking about your faith in football, and I just want to talk about a little bit about maybe like your personal faith. So my first question for you is, why do you believe God exists? Because, I mean, there's a lot of people today that will say, like Richard Dawkins, who says science has buried God, or people will say you're crazy for believing that God exists. There's no evidence, things like that. So my question for you is, why do you believe that God exists?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's something that I always come back to. And my faith has really been strengthened because of apologetics, philosophy, reading people like William Lane Craig and Alexander Pruss and Richard Swinburne, Alvin Plantinga. And so all that has really strengthened my faith. But when I really think of why I believe in God, it's, it was that initial religious experience I had that was my conversion, and then continued religious experiences that I've had since then. And so for someone to say God doesn't exist is almost like, to me, for someone to say you're not perceiving the color red, or you're not seeing the world that you see. It it seems obvious to me because of these religious experiences, right? The way I feel God in prayer, the way I see God act through miracles, those kind of things. And so I love the evidences. I love studying natural theology, but the reason I believe is because I have a relationship with God.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So this is kind of a very similar question here, but what convicts you to believe that Jesus rose from the dead? Because I mean, you could say that God exists and not believe that Jesus rose, but what convicts you that Jesus rose and died for your sins?
Yeah, that's another great question. So obviously, one of my really good friends, Mike Licona, and Gary Habermas have defended historical arguments for the resurrection, the reliability of the Gospels, and so when I look at that stuff, it's just amazing the evidence that's been laid out, especially for historical events like that are so difficult to confirm or make sense of. To see all the evidence that's been laid out for Christ, for the resurrection, for the reliability of the Gospels. Again, it really confirms what I already believe, but it's those religious experiences within the context in which they happened. Right, so I felt Christ within a Christian church. When I read the scriptures, I feel that connection to Christ. I hear His voice when I see that when I read through the Bible, and so it's not audible voice. I'm not saying it like that, but there is a type of experience there that I have, and so while the arguments and all that stuff can support that belief, again, it's very basic to my observation of the world, right? It just seems so true to me, just based on my experiences within those religious contexts.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So, I mean, that's about all the questions I had for you. I really appreciate your time, Mike. It's been awesome,
Thank you so much for having me on. Again, I really appreciate what you do, and maybe in the future we can continue to have some more conversations on apologetics and philosophy, but this has really been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd love to. So thanks for coming on. I just want to remind everyone listening, you can subscribe to us for more conversations like this. Be sure to like this video. You can follow Mike on Twitter. I have his link to his Twitter page in our description, along with our social medias. And if you want to become a patron and support us financially, we are 17% of the way to our goal of $100 a month. So once again, Mike, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it tonight.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks for everyone for listening. Have a great night.